German Shepherd refuses to leave her dying puppy. Then a man opens the door and everything changes. The bitter wind howled through the empty streets of rural Montana, carrying stinging pellets of snow that reduced visibility to mere feet. Dr. James Mitchell pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders as he made his way home from his veterinary clinic, grateful that he decided to walk to work that morning despite the forecast. His truck wouldn't have made it through these conditions anyway. At 45, James had grown accustomed to the solitude that came with living alone in a small town. After losing his wife Sarah to cancer 3 years ago, he'd thrown himself into his work, finding purpose in healing animals while his own heart remained broken. The old farmhouse he'd inherited from his parents sat dark and quiet at the end of Pine Creek Road, a reminder of happier times when laughter and love had filled its rooms. The storm intensified as he trudged through knee-deep snow, the temperature plummeting well below zero. That's when he heard it, a faint whimper carried on the wind, almost lost in the howling storm. James paused, straining to listen. There it was again, definitely the sound of an animal in distress. Following the noise, he veered off his usual path, using his phone's flashlight to illuminate the way. The beam caught a flash of movement near an abandoned shed about 50 yards from his property. As he drew closer, his heart clenched at the sight before him. A German Shepherd lay curled around a tiny puppy, using her body to shield the little one from the brutal elements. The mother's coat was matted with ice and snow, her body trembling violently, but she maintained her protective position. When she saw James approach, she raised her head weakly, eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "Easy there, girl," James murmured, slowly crouching down several feet away. "I'm here to help." The mother dog's ears twitched at his gentle tone, but she made no aggressive moves. Instead, she looked down at her puppy and whined softly. James's professional eye could see the puppy was in critical condition, barely moving, its breathing shallow and labored. "You're going to have to trust me," he said softly, inching closer. The mother watched him intently but allowed him to approach, her maternal instinct seemingly telling her this human represented their only chance for survival. With careful movements, James removed his heavy coat and wrapped it around both dogs. The mother was weak but managed to stand when he encouraged her, though she refused to move until he had scooped up her puppy. Together, they made their way through the worsening storm to his house. Once inside, James immediately went into doctor mode. He carried them to his mudroom, which he converted into a makeshift veterinary space for emergency cases. The mother dog collapsed onto the blanket he laid out, her energy finally spent, but her eyes never left her puppy as James began his examination. The puppy, a female barely 8 weeks old, was hypothermic and dangerously undernourished. Her tiny body felt like ice, and James knew they were working against time. He wrapped her in heating pads and began administering warm subcutaneous fluids while continuing to monitor her vital signs. The mother dog was in better condition, exhausted, dehydrated, and suffering from exposure, but her strong constitution had helped her survive. As James treated them both, he noticed she wore no collar, and her rough condition suggested she'd been on her own for some time. "You're safe now," he assured them, setting up a comfortable bed in the corner with plenty of blankets. "I'm going to call you Grace," he told the mother, who responded with a gentle thump of her tail. "And this little fighter here," he said, looking at the puppy, "she's definitely earned the name Chance." Throughout the night, James kept vigil over his patients. Grace refused food until she saw her puppy take a few drops of warm milk from a bottle, after which she finally accepted some water and soft food. Every hour, Chance showed small signs of improvement. Her breathing grew stronger, and her body temperature slowly rose to normal levels. As the blizzard raged outside, James found himself talking to them, sharing stories about Sarah and the life they'd had together. Grace listened with those intelligent shepherd eyes, occasionally resting her head on his knee as if offering comfort. It had been so long since he'd had any real companionship, and something about these two lost souls touched a place in his heart he'd thought was permanently closed. Days turned into weeks as Grace and Chance recovered. James posted notices about them, but secretly hoped no one would claim them. Grace proved to be exceptionally well-mannered despite her ordeal, suggesting she'd once had a loving home, while Chance grew stronger daily, her playful personality emerging as she gained strength. The transformation in his home was remarkable. Rooms that had been silent for years now echoed with the click of dog nails on hardwood floors and the occasional happy bark. James found himself laughing again, especially at Chance's puppy antics and Grace's patient mothering. One morning, as James prepared for work, he realized Grace had become his shadow, following him from room to room with devoted attention. Chance, now strong enough to bounce around the house, had developed a habit of bringing him her toys every morning, her tail wagging with such force her whole body wiggled. "You know," he told them over breakfast, "I started out saving you too, but I think you might have saved me instead." Spring arrived, melting away the last remnants of that fateful winter storm. James had long since removed the Found Dogs posters, and Grace and Chance had become permanent members of his household. His colleagues at the clinic noticed the change in him. He smiled more, stayed to chat after work, and even started accepting dinner invitations from friends he'd been avoiding. Grace proved to be a natural therapy dog, accompanying James to the clinic where her gentle demeanor helped calm nervous patients. Chance, growing into a beautiful young dog, inherited her mother's intelligence and sweet nature, bringing joy to everyone she met. 1 year to the day after finding them, James sat on his porch watching Grace and Chance play in the yard. Grace had fully recovered from her ordeal, her coat now glossy and healthy, while Chance had grown into a stunning dog who still possessed that puppy-like enthusiasm for life. The sound of their happy barks filled the air, mixing with the chirping of spring birds and the rustle of new leaves. James smiled, thinking about how close he'd come to missing this second chance at happiness. That night, if he'd taken his usual route home, or if the wind had blown in a different direction, he might never have heard Grace's desperate cry for help. Sarah would have loved them, he thought, and for the first time, that thought brought more comfort than pain. Grace trotted over and laid her head on his lap, while Chance bounded up with a well-loved tennis ball, dropping it at his feet with an expectant look. "All right, girls," he laughed, standing up, "let's play." The story of Grace and Chance spread throughout the small town, touching hearts and inspiring others to open their homes to animals in need. The local shelter reported an increase in adoptions, particularly of older dogs and bonded pairs who might otherwise have been overlooked. James began volunteering at the shelter, bringing Grace and Chance along to help socialize new arrivals. Grace had a special way with fearful dogs, seeming to understand their pain and showing them that trust was possible again. Chance's infectious happiness proved that even the most desperate situations could have joyful endings. Their story caught the attention of a local newspaper, and soon people from neighboring towns began visiting the clinic specifically to meet the famous mother-daughter duo. James always told their story with a mixture of humility and wonder, emphasizing how close they'd come to losing Chance that night. Sometimes the biggest miracles come from the smallest moments of compassion, he would say, watching Grace and Chance interact with visitors. "These dogs reminded me that hope can be found in the darkest storms, and that love has the power to heal even the deepest wounds." The old farmhouse was no longer a quiet reminder of loss, but a home filled with life and love again. Photos of Grace and Chance joined those of Sarah on the walls, creating a visual story of how family could be found in the most unexpected ways. James often caught himself talking to Sarah about the dogs, knowing she would have understood how these two remarkable animals had helped him find his way back to living fully again. Grace and Chance had their own special spots in the house. Grace's favorite window seat where she could watch over her domain, and Chance's collection of beds scattered throughout the rooms, though she usually ended up sleeping right next to her mother. Their evening routine became sacred. A walk around the property, dinner together, and quiet time on the porch watching the sunset. On stormy nights, when the wind howled like it had on that fateful evening, Grace would press closer to James, as if remembering their first meeting. Chance, having no memory of that desperate time, would simply curl up with them, creating a warm circle of contentment. The impact of their story rippled outward, inspiring others to look past their own pain and open their hearts to new possibilities. James received letters from people who had adopted shelter dogs after hearing about Grace and Chance, each sharing their own stories of healing and hope. One particular letter stood out. It came from a widow who had adopted a senior German shepherd after reading about Grace. "Your story helped me realize that it's never too late for a new beginning," she wrote. "My Sophie may not have come to me as dramatically as Grace and Chance came to you, but she saved me just the same." James kept that letter, along with many others, in a special album. On quiet evenings, he would sometimes read them aloud to Grace and Chance, who seemed to understand the significance of their impact on others' lives. As the years passed, their bond only grew stronger. Grace's muzzle slowly turned white, but her devotion never wavered. Chance maintained her puppy-like joy, though she became more gentle and attentive to her aging mother. James treasured every moment with them, knowing that each day was a gift that almost hadn't been. The lesson of that winter night stayed with him. Sometimes the most precious things in life come from being willing to step off our planned path, to listen for the quiet calls for help that the world sends our way. Grace and Chance had taught him that love wasn't a finite resource to be hoarded but a force that grew stronger when shared. Their story became legend in the small Montana town. The tale of a mother's devotion, a puppy's will to live, and a man's compassion that broke through the barriers of his own grief. But for James, Grace, and Chance, it wasn't about being legends. It was simply about being family, about the everyday miracles of love and healing that they found in each other. Every evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, James would sit on his porch with his girls beside him, grateful for the storm that had brought them together and the love that had given them all a second chance at happiness. In those quiet moments, watching Grace and Chance contentedly dozing nearby, he knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where they were all meant to be. And sometimes, on particularly clear nights, when the stars shone bright above the Montana sky, James could almost hear Sarah's voice in the gentle breeze, approving of the family he'd found and the joy he'd rediscovered. Grace would lift her head at such moments, as if she heard it too, and Chance would snuggle closer, completing their circle of healing and hope. Together, they had written a story of survival, second chances, and the extraordinary power of love to transform lives. It wasn't just about saving two dogs from a blizzard anymore. It was about three hearts finding their way home to each other, proving that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the midst of life's fiercest storms.